Hey guys, welcome to AriaMastering.com. I want to talk to you a little bit about how to get the most out of the Aria system from a creative point of view. So Aria is an automated analog mastering system. Automated meaning it works like an online mastering system, but instead of using digital processing to render your new file, it actually runs it through outboard hardware gear. How does it do that? Well, it uses a robotic arm, just like what you're seeing on the background of this homepage right here, which I think is really cool for the fact that it even exists, but what makes it even cooler is that it sounds great. And the reason it sounds so good is because it was programmed and designed by a mastering engineer, Colin Leonard. He's one of the best mastering engineers in the world. He's one of my go-to guys. His discography is crazy, and when he conceptualized it from the perspective of making a robotic mastering engineer. Okay, so how does it work? Well, the first thing, we need to grab our file. So I'm just going to go to my bounce files here, and I'm going to drop it right on in. And it's going to start uploading. Now, I've already taken the liberty to do this so that we don't have to watch it upload, because my Wi-Fi is slow. And we get to this screen right here. So once it's uploaded, we're given a project info. A little entry thing here. We're going to keep ourselves organized. I'm going to put in the artist name. It's AKON. And I'm going to put in the name of the song, which is Delay. And now we get to go into the fun stuff, the creative stuff, which can be maybe a little bit daunting if you're not used to the Aria system. Well, that's why we're here. So our first choice in using the Aria system is what mode of mastering engineer we really want. Are we going to want a mastering engineer who's going to keep things pretty safe and transparent and basically just bring up the level and sweeten things? Are we going to want a mastering engineer who's going to give the record a little bit of edge, push it a little bit, get a little bit of extra snap and punch into those drums? Are we going to want the kind of engineer who's going to get things really as loud as possible while incurring as little distortion as possible? Or do we need something that's a little bit more nuanced? Well, depending on what kind of mastering engineer we want, we're going to select either A, B, C, D, or E, and I'm going to go through those settings with you right now. So A is the most transparent setting. This is the one that's going to hit our final limiting stage the least hard. It's something that's designed with just balancing the tone in mind and maybe curbing the dynamics in a way that would be considered quote-unquote safe, meaning it's designed to incur as little artifact as possible through the compression stages. Now, that's really, really good if we're mixing, say, a jazz record or certain types of classic rock records where there's really very little compression within the mix itself, inhibiting the dynamic range. That said, a lot of commercial music has a good amount of compression in there, and our expectation is to push it a little bit on the back end. So if we're doing our typical commercial rock record, a lot of hip-hop type records, we're going to want the B setting. The B setting, aside from the fact that it pushes a little bit more aggressively than the A setting, it also has a different compression curve. And it has really a nice sound, actually. It adds a little bit of bite, especially to the edge of the transients, which I happen to like a lot. If we need to add a little bit of snap and a little bit of edge to something, give it a little bit of aggressiveness, the B setting is really great. The C setting is designed for big pop type records, club hip hop type records, EDM records, where at the end of the day, the file might go to, say, a DJ who's just going to push the record into the red, and it's going to come out as loud as humanly possible. And while there's definitely philosophical debate that goes to the loudness war, personally, I think that a more dynamic record ultimately does sound better. The fact is that in the music industry, there are people who are going to expect the absolute loudest thing that we can possibly create, and so that's why the C setting exists. Right or wrong, it's there. And it actually has a really nice sound. It has this way of doing multiple compression stages that really rounds things out and prepares it for a very loud playback. And so we get this very dense, kind of almost spongy sound, for lack of a better word. It's really very cool. It's something that I like to use actually in a more nuanced way when we get to advanced mode, and I'll talk about why that's applicable and what makes it so cool. Before I do that, I want to talk about the D and the E settings. They're a little bit more nuanced. The primary function for Aria was based around A, B, and C. D and E were add-ons. So the D setting is actually the A setting, but it's just catered a little bit more toward a slightly louder output. A is very safe, but sometimes we're doing something like a pop ballad where maybe we don't have drums in the record, and if we push that into the C setting, we're going to end up with something that's probably too loud and maybe not that flattering. So if we have something where we've got like a bunch of big club style records on the album where we're using the C setting, but then we have a like a pop ballad that's kind of just been wedged in there, this is going to give us basically a slightly louder version of the A setting so that when we get to our ballads, we don't hear a tremendous drop in level going from one song to the next. The E setting barely hits the last limiting stage at all. It's very transparent. It's really good for very dynamic material, say if we're doing like a classical mix or a jazz style mix, certain really dynamic jazz type records, or if we maybe even just want to use Aria as a processor, like maybe we want to take our drum bus, print it out, send it through Aria, and pull it back into our mix. Well, the E setting is going to be really great for that because it's not going to crush any of our dynamic range at all. It's just going to apply the sweetener tones and give us a little bit of that extra magic that we want from the system. All right, now let's jump into advanced mode. I'm going to switch advanced mode on. And this gives us a few more settings if we can go under the hood. Now, I've been using Aria for years. I use it every day. Every mix that I create a reference master for, I'm using Aria. So I'm very, very familiar with the sound. This is probably not something that you're going to need unless you really understand the nuances and you know exactly what you're going for. But in case that's where we're at, I want to sort of describe how I'm using these settings. I mentioned that there's a sound to B and a sound to C. Sometimes I want that sound, but I want more or less dynamic. So for example, if I want something that has that bite and that edge to it, but it still needs to be pushed really exceptionally loud, I might do something like set it to B and then turn up the final output level, get it to hit that limiter a little bit harder. Or in this particular case, with this record that I've uploaded, I'm actually going to go to the C setting because the style is a club style record, but because the bass is so up, I know that the C setting is going to need a little bit more headroom to work with before it starts breaking up on the bottom end. So I'm going to turn the output level down ever so slightly. This is going to give me a more dynamic low end, which is going to be better for this particular record. Now, my other option would be doing something like turning the low frequencies down, giving me a little bit more room to work with down there. If I wanted a louder output, I could certainly do that. Knowing my client, knowing what he wants, he's going to want the amount of bass that I put into it, that really nice sub excursion, but he's going to want it to be dynamic. He's not going to want me to lose it and put a louder output. He's going to want a loud output, but one that doesn't compromise the bass. So I'm going to go with my low frequency settings set just to its default, and I'm going to turn the output level down by 1. Now, we also have the option of doing this with the high frequencies, and a lot of the times, especially if I'm working on really bright genres like EDM or reggaeton, I might turn the high frequencies up a little bit just to get a little bit more sparkle in the top end. For this record, I've already done that. It's on my mix bus. I have a little bit of a top end boost doing just that, so I'm fine with where Aria is going to take it naturally. So I'm going to leave it at default as well. Lastly, we have a width control here. This is our mid-side information, and if I wanted the sides to come up to create a wider mix, which a lot of the times, especially for cinematic type records, we really do, or if I want something that's a little bit more mono, focusing more on the internal punch of the record, which for styles of records like, you know, maybe drum and bass or boom bap hip hop, something like that, we might not really need that kind of width. So we might want to focus more on that central punch. You know, we have the option of contracting it or expanding it. I'm going to leave it right to the default. I've got some really wide claps in this record. They're going to sit perfectly just from the default position. And then, of course, we do have control over our output. If I wanted to go crazy, I could smash this thing to hell and turn this up the full Monty here, C setting, output 2, but I don't want to do that. I want to preserve my low end, like I said before, so I'm going to go down to this -1 setting and give myself a little bit of room. All right, let's hit master and see what happens. We go to a checkout page. I'm going to hit checkout. And Aria starts doing its magic. Now, again, before setting this video up, I already uploaded this. And we get this screen on the way out. So this is our final print screen, and we have a few options here. We have the entire project option, download order 16-bit, download order 24-bit. Why would we want 16-bit? Well, if we're printing to hard copy on a CD, the standard file format for CD is 16-bit. We're going to need to deliver a 16-bit file. Let's get the dithering done here, and let's send something off to press that's ready to go. However, if we're going straight to MP3 or digital, we might want to keep it at 24-bit and just keep more bits. It's going to give us a little bit more dynamic range, although it's arguable how perceivable that even is, but if you got it, why not? Then we've got our information on the order, our mix type, all of the little adjustments we made, and then a preview of our original mix, followed by a preview of the master, and then the option to download the individual song itself. And this is only relevant if we happen to have more than one song in our order. So imagine that we had 4 more of these, then we may only want to download one, or we might want to download them all. But then we have a few other options. Let's say that we downloaded and it doesn't really sound exactly the way that we want. Maybe it's perfect, it's just maybe a hair too dull. We need a little bit more top end. We can hit remaster and it gives us the option to go back to our original settings, and then we can turn our high frequencies up and get something a little bit better. Or maybe we just picked the wrong setting to begin with. If you're getting used to Aria, that's very possible. Maybe you just want to experiment and see what happens if you do it with the B setting, just so you can get your ear around it. Well, we have that option. It's to no extra charge, so let's go for it. All right, preview allows us to give us a quick little taste of what it's going to sound like if I do the remaster. Order MFit, this is a unique setting. This is a setting that will cater the overall sound to fit the iTunes encoder. So when we upload something to iTunes in a lossless format, iTunes is going to turn it into an iTunes file format, which is lossy. And we're going to lose some data, and it does it in a very specific way. It doesn't react very well to a lot of top end, particularly if we're heavily compressed, and it doesn't react very well to very wide mixes where we tend to lose a little bit on the edges. And so ordering MFit is going to customize the sound to just make it a little bit more friendly for the iTunes encoder. Moving to the right, we have the option to order 48K. 48 is the standard for film and TV. This is not something that we really need to worry about if we're doing strictly music, but if we happen to be doing something like dialogue with music or mastering the final re-recording track for a film, then we might want to switch over to 48K just so that it's ready for the film distribution format, and we can go from there. So there's one other thing I want to say about Aria in terms of getting the best results out of it. I probably should have said this at the front, but I'm going to say it here. What we feed Aria is ultimately going to determine what we get. So we want to make our mix sound as good as possible. That means if it sounds better with mix bus processing on, by all means, leave the mix bus processing on. In terms of headroom, it doesn't really matter how much room we leave in a digital full-scale system. As long as we're not doing any unwanted clipping on the master, we're going to be fine. So just give yourself enough room to make sure that you're not hitting the digital ceiling. Anything else, whether it's peaking way low or peaking way high, it really isn't going to make a difference. Just make sure you're giving yourself no unwanted clips. All right, and then in terms of format, we're going to want to use either .wav or .aif formats. Those are lossless formats, meaning there is no data lost when the sound is transferred into a file. If we use an MP3, an MP3 is a lossy format, we are ultimately losing a little bit of sound quality. Even if it's barely noticeable at, say, like 320 kbps, well, we're still losing something. And remember, we are going to be making our master copy. So it's very likely that a derivative form of this, like an MP3 based off of what Aria has produced, will be created, in which case we're going to get MP3 distortion on top of MP3 distortion, which is going to result in not a huge and not super significant, but slight and unnecessary loss of sound. Admittedly, sometimes when we're working in the music business, all we get is MP3s to work with, and we just got to work with what we've got. But if we can avoid using MP3s, let's stick to WAV and AIF formats, and that's going to give you the best results. All right, guys. Check out Aria, have fun working with it, think about it like a musician thinks about it, think about it like a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer thinks about it, and you're going to get the best results out of it, bar none. All right, till next time.